Hi, everyone. It's Susan Lambert. I'm here with our recent Science of Reading the podcast guest, Dr. Wesley Hoover, to tackle a question from our listener mailbag. Crystal in Texas wrote, "My question stems from the episode on the simple view of reading. Dr. Wesley Hoover said, reading comprehension is the same thing as language comprehension. It's just that it's done with respect to print rather than phonology, rather than listening. And so it requires the same set of skills. If that's true, should we read text aloud to students when assessing comprehension-based standards so we can measure their language comprehension without the barrier of decoding? This seems especially important in second grade, where many students are still developing automatic word recognition and haven't yet mastered decoding to the point of reading grade-level text fluently." There's a bit more to Crystal's question, but I'm going to stop there for now. And Dr. Hoover, see what advice you might have for Crystal.
Well, thank you. I think that's a very important question, and I think it is a question that many people will have. And the first thing I would recommend is to think about the complexity of the relationship between standards, assessments, and accommodations. So it's not just a question of should I read the text to the student or not. You need to worry about what's the purpose of the standard you're testing and what's the use of the data that are going to be collected from that testing. So to do that, the first thing I would recommend is have a conversation with your assessment personnel within your district. And the reason that's important is because if you do an accommodation on your own and the people that are using the data don't know that that accommodation was given, you can actually end up in a situation where you might hurt a student who was getting the accommodation. And so let me talk a little bit about what that might look like. And this stems from the simple view. As the question suggests, there is a relationship here in the simple view between language comprehension and reading comprehension. Both tap the same comprehension ability. The difference is one's accessed through the ear and one's accessed through the eye, one by listening, one by reading. So if the standard you're testing is reading comprehension, and the data are going to be used to try and understand whether a student can read, then it's very important that that student actually read the text. And then reading the text, people will be able to understand whether or not reading comprehension is a problem for this particular student. Mm-hmm. If you do that, then the data can be used appropriately to assess whether or not that student has a reading comprehension difficulty. If, however, you give the accommodation and read the text to the student, then, as the questioner suggests, you're not testing reading comprehension anymore. You're testing language comprehension. And that's important because if you know this student has a difficulty with word recognition, then assessing language comprehension will tell you whether or not they also have a difficulty with language comprehension. So the accommodation could be very informative to a teacher who knows this student has a difficulty with word recognition. I want to find out whether they also have a difficulty with language comprehension. So the critical comment here is that it's important to know how the data are going to be used in order to determine whether the accommodation should be used.
All right. And she had another part to her question too that I think we're almost getting to. So let's hear the other part. She says, on the other hand, when assessing standards that specifically target decoding and independent reading, should we only read questions and answer choices aloud, since those standards expect the students to decode the text on their own? So it's almost the opposite part of the question, right?
Yeah. If I understand it right, I think the question about whether you should read the questions to the student.
Yep.
One of the things that's important in understanding the simple view of reading is that since language comprehension and reading comprehension tap the same comprehension ability, in assessing them, you want to make sure that the assessments are as parallel as possible. So in doing a reading comprehension test, if you ask the student to read a text and then you read questions to the student to answer, you want to make sure you do the same thing in language comprehension. That is, you read the text to the students and ask them to repeat or ask them to respond to a set of questions. Then you should be reading the questions to the student just like you did in the reading comprehension part of the test, so that the decoding aspect, the word recognition aspect, is not confounded in the questioning of the students to get their response.
Oh, thank you so much for helping us unpack that. It still feels complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. The Simple View it lays out where the complexities are.
That's my favorite quote of your whole episode. The whole episode we did with you was, the simple view of reading isn't simple. It just buckets simply the complexities in two different places.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Dr. Hoover. And thank you, Crystal, for submitting your question. And listeners, we'd love to hear your comprehension questions too. So write to us, or even better, share a voice memo at amplify.com/SOR mailbag.